I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Chris Chappell. I'm the Doshi Professor of Indic and Comparative Theology at Loyola Marymount University. And my wife, Maureen, is getting us some tea, so she will join in a second. And as I have been commenting, it's just so delightful to see old friends, students from years past, colleagues, and so great. Josh, who's a philosophy professor, is now with us. And we come from so many different walks of life. And to introduce Mary Evelyn, I'm going to tell a little bit of a story and then give a little bit of her credentials. So when I was almost 21 years old, I was looking for where to go to graduate school. And I was quite careful, methodical, and discerning. And I decided that I wanted to live still in New York. And I had two options. I had a very nice option at Columbia University. So I went and I visited. And my wife came with me, and we spoke with the professor who would have been our major professor, my major professor, and we both had majored in religious studies together, and Maureen was actually better at Sanskrit than I was back in the day. Here she is. And we just looked at each other and walked around the corner up, I think it was in Kent Hall at Columbia, and said, oh no, this is not where we want our time to be spent. So then I went to the next place on my list and sat in on class with a couple of different professors. And the first class I sat in on was with Thomas Berry. And he invited me over and we talked about the program, and I thought, wow, this is great. But that was an undergraduate class. So then I went and I visited the graduate Sanskrit seminar with Dr. Jose Pereira. And sitting right there, right next to me, was none other than Mary Evelyn Tucker, working on her master's degree, and her soon-to-be husband, John Grid. And not only did I say, wow, this guy knows his Sanskrit, but in the midst of those graduate students, I could see that this was a place among friends. So that September, I showed up, and sure enough, Thomas Berry delivered, and he would invite us over to the Hudson River, and we would have conversations. And Mary Evelyn went then on to Columbia after finishing her master's to do her PhD. And we stayed in touch through thick and thin, through dissertation time and first jobs and all of the above. And she had lived for some years in Japan. And she was very interested specifically in Neo-Confucianism. And Theodore de Bary, who is the senior scholar, was the senior scholar who crafted the world-class humanities requirements, global humanities requirements at Columbia, became her main professor. And he widely published, mentored the dissertations for so many profound scholars of Confucianism and Neo-Confucianism. He convened the Columbia Seminar, which I then became member. And so I became a Columbia colleague after my PhD to a degree. And when she finished her work, she published a book on Kabaro Ekin. And part of the Neo-Confucian vision is the balancing of heaven and earth. And as this found Japanese expression, it linked so profoundly with the love of land known to us all through the Shinto faith, as well as the love of propriety, the love of li, the idea that there is a correct way to be in the world. And after teaching at Iona College, she joined the faculty of Bucknell University And we had a wonderful riverboat ride where we met the people from Bucknell that eventually hired both John and Mary Evelyn. And then the world opened new doors. And at the Center for the Study of World Religions, while John and Mary Evelyn were in residence, a donor came who said, "The earth is burning. What can religions do?" And the two of them convened the first of 10 conferences at Harvard with 2 follow-ups, one at the United Nations. And the first conference was on Buddhism and ecology. And one after another, Hinduism and ecology, Jainism and ecology, indigenous traditions and ecology, Shinto and ecology, Confucianism and ecology, Christianity and ecology, Islam and ecology, Judaism and ecology. This library was born. More than 600 scholars participated. People came from all over the world in the late 1990s. And a new discipline came to be. And John and Mary Evelyn eventually moved from Bucknell to Yale. And through the Forum on Religion and Ecology, and through their scholarship and through their tireless leadership, they have not only mentored so many now faculty members into this realm, but they've guided religious leaders, they've guided countless students, and through the online offerings of Yale and the Coursera platform, have made available a resource open to any and all of you. They also oversee thomasberry.org. And I was just telling Mary Evelyn that our students today saw about 20 minutes of Thomas at his finest from 1984. And I recommend that website to you all. And for quite some time, they were in residence at the Graduate Theological Union and working very closely with cosmologist and professor at California Institute for Integral Studies, Brian Swim. And from that collaboration, this beautiful movie that hopefully you either have seen or will soon see, called Journey of the Universe, they translated this cosmic sense in a lineage that extends from Teilhard de Chardin through Thomas Berry to John and Mary Evelyn, and now shared widely with the world. And what Mary Evelyn will do tonight is to give a little bit of a synopsis of this way of seeing life from origin to present awareness, and then engage us all in questions. So again, there's an auspicious number, the square root of 8 of people are here. So Mary Evelyn, so glad to welcome you to this space. And you need to unmute.
Thank you, Chris. It's always wonderful to work with you, collaborate with you over these many, many years. And you're one of our most stalwart, deep friends, deep scholars. And along with Maureen, we've had many adventures both in the US and in India together. And we're so grateful for all of that, but especially for your support, your encouragement, and your always upbeat, wonderfully hopeful attitude. And, you know, I'm really eager to hear your questions about the film and so on, but Chris said a few things I was going to say, but I think you know them anyway, of the influence of Thomas Berry and Teilhard de Chardin and so on. But let me then take a step back and say, why did we do this film? Because it was very difficult. I thought doing the 10 conferences at Harvard that really didn't understand why religion might matter for ecology, I thought that was really difficult, and it was murderously exhausting after 3 years. I just, it was so tiring. But Journey of the Universe was even bigger, even more exhausting. Because it took us 10 years to do this film, to write the script, to film it in Samos. We went there 3 times to do it, and then to edit it, to raise the money for it, and put it together, to finally get it from 2 hours to 1 hour, because that's what PBS wanted, and KQED in San Francisco took it onto PBS, and then all the PBS stations welcomed it for about 3 years, which was terrific. And as you know, it's on Amazon Prime now. But the point is, it was a long journey to make Journey, to write the book, to do the conversations. But we hope for you all, no matter what your age is, your background, your profession, your family, your gender, your religion, and so on, we hope it serves in a variety of ways, but most especially to inspire human energy and human creativity in relation to this extraordinary story that's only beginning to dawn in human consciousness. It'd be hard to estimate how many people around the planet actually are beginning to absorb that we are cosmological beings, we are evolutionary beings, we are ecological beings. And I think that's what this film represents, this transformation of consciousness into the larger parts of our being that most of the world's religions understood very well. India and Hinduism has the Mahapurusha, the great person. All these traditions have the macrocosm and the microcosm. Confucianism has heaven, earth, and human, or cosmos, earth, and human. So the religious traditions have understood this larger dimension of the person, the self, the small self, the great self, the Atman, the Brahman, and so on. But all of a sudden, we have a new scientific cosmology that's offering us a story even larger, if you will, and more complex and more scientifically sophisticated than anything humans have known up until this point. So it's not to say that the stories, the myths, the cosmologies of the world's religions are past history or not helpful and so on. But it's to say, as Thomas did say in 1978, we have a new story. We have something coming out of all the disciplines of science, you know, from astronomy and physics of the early universe to the immense emergence of time, of stars and galaxies and planetary systems 10 billion years before even our Earth system emerged. Think of what that time means. Think of what it means to absorb that through our telescopes, Hubble in particular down there in Southern California, and so on. But then when we have the Earth itself emerging 4.6 billion years ago, we have all the other sciences just pouring into this, the geological sciences of plate tectonics and so on, of a volcanic Earth community, of the marine sciences. What came out of the oceans to create life, to emerge things that walk on land and went back into the sea and came out again, and so on. The fluorescence of plants, of forests, of reptiles, of insects, of mammals, of birds, and finally humans, you know, so that this 65 million year period, this Cenozoic period that Thomas Berry said many, many years ago, is coming to an end because we're in an extinction moment. That's just beginning to dawn on humans with this notion of a new era, the Anthropocene era. That Thomas Berry years ago said, we are moving into an Ecozoic era, a new understanding of both our ecological responsibilities and how we are part of an Earth community. We're not just Los Angelites or New Yorkers or Americans or Indians or Germans or South Americans. We are Earth people. And that is what is dawning in a really new and exciting way. So to do that, of course, I'm sure you're aware that Brian Swim and Thomas Berry wrote the first telling of this story in their book, Universe Story, in 1992. And it had never been told before as a scientific story and a mythological story. And they did this combination, this new fusion. It had a very strong impact, but we felt that it needed also to be told in film form. And that's why John and Brian and I and the incredible director in the Bay Area, David Kennard, and others who helped with the editing, and a guy from LA actually did the music and so on. We had people working from all over to make this happen. And I come back to the point that I started with about energy. And what I've just been describing is the energy that moved through time to give birth to the various forms of stellar life, galactic life, solar system life, planetary life, moon life, if you will, that these transformative developmental time of self-organizing dynamics that gave rise to change of forms and eventually a change of consciousness. So that process, as we're beginning to understand it, needed to be visualized, needed to have a sense that would awaken in the human the activation of energy, not only to feel that we're part of it, but that we're participating in its continuity. And that's the point of this. It's not just a beautiful story, as Thomas used to say, it's a functional cosmology that gives us part of the energy for the work that needs to be done. The energy in ecology and justice, in the flourishing of societies, and so on. So I'm saying all that because we are more than aware we are in one of the greatest crises humans have ever faced. From climate change in the range that you know in California especially, and all across the planet, these problems, ecological toxicities, climate, justice issues, inequities, economic poverty and development issues, et cetera, are coming to a head. So how are we going to manage and navigate these challenges without a deeper vision of who we are as humans and who we are as planetary beings? So the call here is to activate human energy, but not just for individual transformation or individual enlightenment, as a Buddhist path might be, a Hindu path might be, and so on. As wonderful as those enlightenments may be, it is to participate in a transformation that is on a planetary scale over time, never to be realized probably in our lifetime. Now, let me just make one or two final comments and open this up. I really, by the way, I'm not keen in our discussion period to go into political issues. We've just gone through a very tough election and so on. And we're kind of on the other side of that. But I want to focus on something that's long-term transformation, because that's what this is about. At the same time, I don't want to just say this is optimistic beyond the realism of what we're dealing with. I want to say that Teilhard de Chardin, who inspired this in its inception, lived through as a stretcher bearer World War I. He was in the trenches in one of the most bloody warfares known to that era. And he had many, many sufferings in his life. He was exiled to China. Many members of his family died while he was away. He was exiled from France, had to come to the US, died here, almost unknown in many ways, outside of the circles of science and so on. And yet his influence to say, we must dynamize human energy, that has been one of the great inspirations of this work. Because between the two world wars, he saw Europe collapse in existential angst and despair and a lack of meaning and purpose. And that is what also infects our society and many societies around the world. Meaning, purpose, the reason for being. Japanese call it ikigai. So I'm suggesting, I'm not just saying this is an optimistic Pollyanna kind of vision. This has come out of a profound acknowledgement of human suffering, of the unraveling of meaning and purpose in our times, but earlier, and also the risk that is at stake now. And this is why I'm not so keen on a question like, what can I do? It's not the I, it's the we. It's not the me, it's the we. We've got to think of a larger sense of common good. And that's what this film and project is trying to get us to think about. We're all coming out of these same planetary, biological, geological systems. We are all children of cosmos and earth. And that sense of commonality amidst diversity is what is one of the offerings here. These are seeds. These are being planted. They're not yet flowers, but hopefully those of you who are younger may see some of the flowering in our lifetime. My final comment is Barry's sense of the three principles that grounds a universe story, a journey story, is differentiation. Everything is different. Everything is unique. People, ethnicities, and so on, but plants, trees, etc. Differentiation, subjectivity, and that is one thing I'd most welcome discussion on. What is subjectivity? What is that? It's the interiority of everything. Some religions speak of it as soul, the indwellingness of humans, but the indwellingness in the whole natural world. Artists understand this. Turner understood it. Van Gogh understood it. The Impressionists understood it. There's an illuminated interiority to all of matter. And that's why what I studied in graduate school especially is chi, matter energy. This is coming together. So interiority is part of the whole universe unfolding. As well, his third principle is communion, that with difference, with interiority, there needs to come together something that unites us, that attracts us. Gravity is one of the ways of talking about it scientifically. Love is a way of talking about it in the human sphere. We now know as well, through the work of ecologists and biologists and so on, the communication that is taking place on every level of our ecosystems. The trees, their roots communicating, the mushrooms and all of the myceliums communicating, the migrations of birds, of salmons, of turtles, and so on. Communication is happening. This is part of the consciousness that is differentiated throughout the natural world. So we are now understanding through the work of people like Jane Goodall and others, the tremendous sentience in the chimp world, the mammalian world, the reptile, bird, fish world, the natural world. And this is a great revolution in many ways. Indigenous peoples understood this. My husband studies this. We're adopted into the Crow tribe. Indigenous peoples understand to today and are also helping us to recover this sense of interiority and of communion. So let me end there. And as I say, I welcome any questions, whether it's about the making of the film or the ideas, whatever's on your mind. I'd be delighted to chat with you. Yes, Teresa. And you could put your questions in the chat if you like, if that's easier for you. It might be fun that way too.
Thank you so much. So this idea of community and building a community and having a common language to work towards the evolution of a more supported environment. For me, I see so much inspiration in educating young children so that they're able to see that continuity and connection in all things, and doing so in a very visceral level, really allowing them to be connected with the earth through their education and manipulate the earth and realize how it manipulates them in return. And I'm wondering if you possibly know of any push in education in this direction to have more kind of hands-on, grassroots, literally, connection with the environment, if that's something that's developing.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful question. And I'm sure you're aware that Maria Montessori actually had a huge sense, right, of cosmic education and so on. So that's a major place to begin. And the work of Jennifer Morgan that carries that forward, she's got a network called Deep Time Journey Network. And you can look it up, and she's got classes there, and she's drawing people together. But she's also, Jennifer Morgan has written 3 books for children, although I think they're great for adults, because she spent quite a few years, she studied with Thomas Berry and so on, and she spent years with scientists just like Brian did and we did to do our work, to get the story told in a way that was accessible. So her network, the teachers she works with, she gives lots of talks to Montessori groups. You know, the Steiner people and Waldorf, of course, really understand this embodied, embedded education. And I should mention on our journeyoftheuniverse.org website, there's a whole curriculum, because we have worked with secondary schools, largely the private schools, but teachers there are very, very keen to do integrated learning that brings together science, social science, humanities, and so on. And we have just an amazingly creative graduate student that we're working with now. And so he has done, Teresita, to your question, some very interesting questions of like, how do we really experience the stars? Or what does starburst, you know, what is that about? And then other exercises that are place-based and so on. So I recommend all of those to you. And Orion Magazine, one of the great nature writer magazines, also has a lot of resources for education in this area. So thank you so much for your question. Appreciate it. Great. And let's see. Okay. Forgive the darkness of this question, but what convinces you that current possibly pending extinction is not the fact the next natural step in whatever is currently in universal progress? Okay, if I'm understanding the question from Rick Berger, you know, no one can predict the future. It's a great question. It's a really important question. So the word that you're using, you know, what convinces you? I'm not convinced of any prediction of where we're going, right? But I am deeply convinced that human creativity, and this is a major part of the unfolding of the universe, that everything emerges with these creative processes. And if we can align our human creativity with nature's creativity, and that is being done in things like biomimicry, in things like energy that is sustainable energy, renewable energy, solar energy, wind energy, geothermal energy. These are aligning humans and the needs for energy with the natural energy systems of the planet. So the green cities, you know, green economies, and so on. There's a lot out there. We have an amazing plethora of creative projects, of creative ideas, and so on. It's the will, and of course, there's a political part here, which again, I don't want to ignore it, and I don't want to completely shut down questions that way. But the human sense of creativity and possibility is, I think, boundless when it is aligned with something larger than itself. And that's the possibility here, to create not just sustainable communities or a sustainable earth, but the flourishing of the earth. And that's the spirit of joy and creative energy. The arts are needed, music is needed, poetry is needed, and so on. So, you know, again, you're mentioning one of the most important things of our moment is that we are in a sixth extinction period. And Thomas Berry spoke about this well over 30 years ago. So we've all been living, Chris and Maureen and John and I, and many people who heard Thomas Berry years ago have been living with this idea. And it's just more recently coming into a larger human consciousness. So let me conclude here with your very, very valuable question. We are at a moment of extinction, of destruction, and also creativity and construction. And that is the enormous creative tension that we are living with. We've been living with incredible creative tension for the last 4 years in this country and so on. But with that creative tension, I like to think of it as a yin-yang. New things will emerge. And I see that, by the way, in our students who, you know, are inheriting enormous problems, but their energy and their commitment to make a difference coming out of the Yale School of the Environment is very inspiring. So thank you for that question. I take it as extremely important. Let's see. Okay, from Narinda Parson, do you think one has to know self to then be able to help the community? That's a beautiful question. And, you know, that's, I think, one of the reasons why Chris and Maureen do meditation and teach yoga and so on, and are such grounded human beings. Because yes, we really do have to know ourselves, right, before we can help others. And that's the spiritual path has to be deeply interwoven into this work. And you see, that's what I feel about this human energy. When I'm saying human energy, it's actually a deeply spiritually grounded perspective. I mean, I meditate in the morning and we all have our rituals, right? But if we don't, and if we're just doing the environmental work or the justice work, we get burned out. And I'm a 60s person, a civil rights person, anti-Vietnam War person. And when I saw the moral force of religious leaders and the spiritual tenor and tone, everything changed in the civil rights movement. And that's, you know, our hope with both the religion and ecology work and in this deep work on a cosmological perspective that can really give us energy. So yes, Narendra, a beautiful question, a really important question. And that's a lifelong question, right? Okay, Joshua Mason, do you see a teleology in all of this cosmic emergent or open-ended spontaneity or something else? Great, these are all great questions, Joshua. So teleology, as you know, is the sense that there's an overriding purpose to the whole unfolding evolutionary process. Now, scientists are not keen on that because for the most part, not all, but most scientists don't want to see purpose, God talk, or anything like intelligent design and so on. So they're very wary of religion and science, religion. So this is a really important question. But so at the same time, this is the way I would answer this. No scientist would deny the fact that from lesser complexity to greater complexity, things have emerged, okay? from the great flaring forth, as Brian likes to call it, to the complexity of life systems that we have on the planet now. That is a movement towards complexification, which is what Teilhard was talking about too. And he added, and again, the scientists wouldn't disagree with this, from lesser consciousness to greater consciousness, namely interiority in things, the self-organizing dynamics in things has eventually emerged into self-reflexive consciousness in the human. But what's so exciting is we realize there's consciousness in the mammal world, in the caribou world, in their migration patterns and so on and so forth that I've mentioned earlier. So if you have cats or dogs, there's sentience there, right? There's communication there. That's why we love them, or those of you who are horse people or whatever. So the sense of the anthropic principle is this, that all the conditions of the emergence of galaxies, star systems, planetary systems, Earth systems, and eventually life, that trajectory is called an anthropic principle. And people like Freeman Dyson, who was at the Princeton Center for Higher Studies, the name's slightly wrong, but one of the most brilliant scientists on the planet, certainly had he agreed that there's an anthropic principle, that the conditions for life emerged over time. That's a form of teleology. You can say light teleology. So we would agree that there's those conditions emerge. So we would agree with an anthropic principle. And we would also agree that this is a living system, a Gaian system as well. So the biggest question, Joshua, I think, is how we see the whole system also relates to how we see our own life. And if we see our own life not having a purpose or a meaning or not connected to something, we all want to give to something larger than ourselves. I think that's why people have children. That's why people work very hard on the projects they love. That's our interiority and teleology, a sense of meaning and purpose. So, but we have to be very careful in negotiating this. I'm in a very science-based school, and I can never use the word teleology for sure. Everything's random, purposeless. Have a nice day, you see? When you take meaning and purpose out, that's a really huge issue. So, Joshua, thank you for that question. What are methods to enlighten our soul? Stephen, that's a great question. I mean, all the world's religions have that, right? Have practices. I mean, your teacher is a yogi, and he's worked on this his whole life. So enlightening the soul, music enlightens the soul, poetry enlightens the soul, dance does, any kind of movement, running, swimming enlightens the soul. This is body-mind coming together. I do Tai Chi, Qigong. That's hugely energizing, and so on. So from literature to poetry and the arts to all of the systems that we have in the world's religions. But Stephen, I think your question is so important because I think what we need too, and that's what in this curriculum that I mentioned that's on our website, we need exercises that enlighten our soul in relation to the soul of the earth. The earth has a soul. The earth has its living presence. So we have a little vegetable garden. We've got a little Zen garden here in our yard. Every morning I go out and I'm just like drinking in the light, the air, the wind, the water, and so on. And how do we make these into rituals, prayer rituals? And people are beginning to do it. It's happening all over. Even the Catholic Church has the seasons of creation now for liturgies. So that's emerging and it's very exciting. So thanks for that question. Mirjam, I believe it is, simply acknowledging the dynamizing energy of your way to share here, which moves me deeply right now. Okay, thank you. So you're acknowledging that. Cultivate our sense of awe as a way forward. I remember from the end of Journey of the Universe, so compelling to follow this invitation. Thank you. Wonderful. Is it Mirjam? I hope, Mirjam. So thank you for that question, because cultivating a sense of awe is exactly what I was suggesting in answer to the question of how do we cultivate our soul? Because if we keep alive awe and wonder and beauty, the depths of the sacred lie there, you see, and that keeps us open, both to new learning, but to keeping our soul and our spirit alive. So you really get it, that awe is at the basis of Journey of the Universe, for sure. And that's why Brian is so infectious when he talks about a supernova and all the elements of our body coming out of it. It's just stunning. I've got goosebumps just talking about it. Imagine the stars are our ancestors. Think of what we can do for that, for children, you know, back to Teresita's point, and poetry and so on. It's thrilling. It is so thrilling. And I think, to be obvious, I think this can make a difference, you see. So thank you for that lovely comment and question. Laurel, thank you for your work. For those of us who want to contribute in a meaningful way to society, community, but don't know in what way, even on a small scale, or where to begin, how would you advise to help find inspiration and direction? Gosh, again, great question, Laurel. So I think, you know, we can begin by deepening our education in this area. And so I hope you'll have a chance maybe to take the Coursera classes, and I'm not pushing them, you know, personally, I'm just responding to this question. They are free for audit and so on, but there's lots of lectures out there. Brian introduces things, there's lots of readings and so on. So, and you know, as I move towards other phases in my life, this is exactly what I want to do. I want to deepen my knowledge of some of the biological and ecological parts of our planet. And you know, why is Jane Goodall probably the most well-known and popular scientist on the planet? Because her instinct was this deepening of her knowledge of connection to these chimps, and to see them as living beings. And that has shifted our consciousness, you see. So anything that you can do to activate that, cultivate it in a garden, cultivate it with plants or with children. If you're retired, you know, to volunteer. I think across the board in this United States, we've got people post 60 who are retiring, who have time. Some of them have money, and a lot of them have experience. I think we need a Peace Corps for the post 60s generation to give back, because that is possible, because they were part of a 60s generation and now they are in a post 60s age-wise generation. So that kind of creativity, you know, book clubs, film clubs, art clubs, all of this is really important. And then, of course, giving back in areas that are so needed. You know, many of you are from LA or living there now with LMU. You know, Journey of the Universe was part, well, it was actually the universe story at the time, but an African-American woman, and you can hear this in the conversations of the Journey site. And I'm sure Chris has already shared with you a link to get at those conversations, you know, free access and so on. And I believe they're also available online. But Belvie Rooks in Inner City Watts, LA, did weekly Saturday workshops for middle school children, for them to tell the story of how Watts was formed, how the migrations from the South created it, and so on and so forth. And she called it From the Streets to the Stars. And she got those inner city kids so absorbed in this story that by the end of the summer, they had these like huge block parties telling their story, pictures of families, but all the way out to the universe and back to Watts. So this matters. This is inspiring for people. I could tell you other stories about that, but giving back to those in need is clearly what's most essential. Okay, Ricky Ray, do you have a personal means of hearing earthly will within human will or attuning to the needs of our collective ecological health? Wow, that is terrific. And I'll bet, Ricky, that you probably do because you asked the question. Let me just read it again for all of you. Do you have a personal means of hearing earthly will within human will or attuning to the needs of our collective? Whoops, it just slipped out of the view. I think what I'm understanding, my personal means of attuning is trying to listen, to be quiet, to give time each day to the sense of what's happening right around me, of course, with the larger world as well. But I do think this is why my husband studies shamanism. You know, shamans understand how to be in touch with nature and its powers. And what I would recommend to Ricky and all of you is Brian Swim has a series of videos that we've just put out in podcasts. There are also videos, it's called The Powers of the Universe. So if you go to the Journey of the Universe site, you'll find those podcasts. It's all about the forces of universe and earth and how we connect to it. And it's part of, I think, an answer to what you're saying. We can do this. We can re-attune ourselves towards the living, speaking earth. And a final resource is we did a conference called Living Earth Community. That's totally open source, Living Earth Community. All of the interviews that I did with people who are leading, David Abrams and David Haskell, who did the Song of Trees, Jeanette Armstrong, a Native American person. So there's interviews and articles there about this attunement to nature. Okay, they're popping up right and left. Education is always key. All right, one above that, I think, who's ever moving these, I guess they're moving. Okay, journeyoftheuniverse.org. Thank you for putting the website out there. thomasberry.org, thank you. And Astrid, I was propped open to the idea that life is the essence of everything cosmically, as opposed to my previous belief that life was a unique condition to us as humans. And thinking along those lines, do you believe there are human aliens out there in one of those galaxies or organisms with the possibility of consciousness like us? Okay, so I'm not one who's entertaining the idea of life out there, but others are, scientists and non-scientists, mostly because I'm so concerned about life right here and the awakening, as you've just pointed out, to the livingness all around us is one of the most exciting things we can do. And I repeat, indigenous peoples have so much to teach us on this. You know, we go out to the Crow Reservation in Montana. John's been part of the Sundance 10 times, and the rituals that they are doing for all of life on Earth is just astounding. So I'm interested in supporting the indigenous sensibilities about these issues. And, but it's not to say some people aren't interested in and concerned about life elsewhere, but I just feel this is as precious and as beautiful as it gets. So that's where I am. Okay, Chris mentions the Coursera classes, thank you. Mojda Joy, thank you so much. I really enjoy your talk and look at the website, good. Okay, thank you. Rachel, good, you put down deep time network. Thank you, you're right, it's a deep time network. Serenity. I find that the ability and willingness to take personal ecological action is deeply impacted by socioeconomic status, oppression, education, and privilege of some sort. Do you believe it's possible for us to move from I to we without absolving the myriad of issues that limit human connection? Yeah, that's terrific. The Earth Charter that I was involved in, that came out of the Rio '92 conference, speaks about universal responsibility, but with differentiated means to attend to the changes and things that need to happen. So I think your point is extremely well taken. And I think one of the exciting things that's happening right now, certainly at our School of the Environment, but everywhere, and it's partly because of Black Lives Matter in the summer, but it's Indigenous peoples protesting the loss of their land. Standing Rock, the largest gathering of Indigenous peoples ever, certainly in the modern period, but because of a pipeline going underwater. The Indigenous peoples around the world fighting. Huge article in the New York Times of being killed in Colombia, by the extractive industries and so on. I'm part of an interfaith rainforest initiative trying to support Indigenous voices for the rainforest, et cetera. So we know of the inequities and the socioeconomic issues that you're pointing to in our country. The BIPOC movement, Black, Indigenous, people of color, I think this is hugely important. And I think more voices, more diversity is emerging. And in particular, the notion of environmental justice or environmental racism. Flint, Michigan being an example, the Louisiana Cancer Alley, we can go on and on. So this notion of cry of the earth, cry of the poor is really coming forward. And that phrase comes out of the Pope's encyclical, Laudato Si, the cry of the earth, the cry of the poor. And I could say a lot more about that, but I just want to make sure I get to the other questions. But thank you for that, Serenity. It's just so important what you're saying. And it's part of the breaking down of privilege of a place like Yale. And I could tell you all kinds of things about that, but our student body is fortunately quite diverse. Our faculty needs to be much more diverse, but the students are driving many of these changes for environmental justice. So thank you. And we can't go from me to we without attending to these. I think that's the other part of your question. Okay, so now I've got Chuck Hamilton. If the earth itself has a soul, indeed, and interiority, is COVID its outward expression, response to humanity's continued insults to it? Chuck, that's terrific. And Thomas Berry would say, we can't have healthy people on a sick planet. And that is the manifestation here. And if you Google the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative, Jane Goodall has a short video there that's riveting, and she makes this point. You can't eat bats and get away with it. You can't have wet markets in China and Southeast Asia and elsewhere and get away with it. Look at the killing of mink up in Denmark right now. So yes, this is a manifestation of our really distorted habits and so on. And I'm not just saying Wuhan and not just blaming the Chinese. We have lots to say about our treatment of animals and factory farming of animals and so on. So this is a huge wake-up call to we are one Earth community, and that the future is impossible without a shared future. That's the point. That's the message. And hopefully COVID is teaching us that, even though very, very painfully. Okay, Lauren, what are the free classes? Okay, The classes are, Chris or somebody maybe can, if you go to Coursera, it's a platform for online education, and just Google Journey of the Universe Coursera, they will come up. So there's one, the first one's on the Journey film and book. The second, they're just 6 weeks. You can take them, sign up anytime. You can spread out to take them however long you need in your own life circumstances. The second one is on the Journey Conversations, where I interviewed 10 scientists on all the different parts of evolution and 10 environmentalists, which includes Belvy Rooks doing her reporting on her project in Watts. But it includes others, artists and musicians and so on, teachers. So, and the third one is on Thomas Berry. So just Coursera and Journey of the Universe, and you'll find it. And they're free for audit, okay? I belong to the Jain faith, and we respect all earth, like grass, wind, having a soul, okay, as they grow. So we respect and seek daily forgiveness for uses. Absolutely. Smita, thank you so much for that. And a big shout out to Chris Chappell, because when we did the Harvard conferences, as he mentioned, on all the Asian religions, Western religions, and indigenous religions, he led and organized, yes, the conference, thank you, Chuck, on Jainism and ecology as part of that series. And it was a remarkable gathering. And it increased this awareness of ahimsa, of non-harm, that of course inspired Gandhi and the nonviolent movement and Martin Luther King and all of us. So thank you for that comment. And we have lots to learn from Jainism, from macrobiotic food that they've been so instrumental in as well. Thank you. So to piggyback off of Serenity's question, this idea of neoliberal subjectivity seems to place the ecological burden onto individuals. The consumer is to blame rather than the gross actions of corporate entities. How can we balance the effort of being good consumers, effective boycotters, while still holding the greater neoliberal regime responsible for our current ecological situation? And Katie, thank you for putting up the website for the Coursera courses. So John Flicker, great question. So if you noticed, I think it was Shell just recently sent out this message, what would you do as a consumer, you know, to move away from oil? And they got such pushback as part of the denialists, huge oil companies as part of the problem, sort of pushing it back onto the consumer and so on, which is kind of outrageous. So, you know, everything's happening at once, isn't it? The point of, I'm reading the last part of it. How can we balance the efforts of being good consumers and effective boycotters while still holding the greater neoliberal regime responsible? That's the question. That is really the question. And I think I'll be lightly political here, hopefully, but that's where we are. You see, we are between two worldviews. One that has a neoliberal, market-driven economic system that has no care for equity or for those who don't make it within the system. And the Pope's encyclical, Laudato Si, is massively critical of this neoliberal, economic, market-driven, non-limit sense of capitalism, frankly. And so it's not just, this is the Pope critiquing it and saying it is driving us over a cliff. Now, on the other hand, you're saying our boycotting, our responsible consumerism, and so on. Yes, and we have to ratchet it up. We have to make it systemic. And we do have, this is what I was trying to say earlier, we have ecological economics. It's a total counterpoint to neoliberal economics. Richard Norgaard lives in Berkeley. He's one of the leaders of this movement and so on. Ecological economics said years and years ago with people like Herman Daly, limits to growth, accountability for the externalities of any economic system. Extractive industries don't account for the land that they are destroying, for the rivers that they're polluting, the air, et cetera. All those are externalities in an economic neoliberal system and model. The financial system has got to be accountable. Just today, the Fed, there's a very interesting report that said it's got to take into account climate change. There's a huge bipartisan report that just came out in September. Bob Litterman, who's speaking of 32 people, bipartisan report saying the financial industry is going to be overturned to the tune of trillions of dollars if we do not attend to this. So I've been in meetings at banks in New York and so on that are really concerned about this. My brother is head of Chubb Insurance in New York. Think about insuring places in California, right? You have a 1 year breathing point now because the government said they've got to insure these places. But the insurance industries are totally out front about this now. And I could tell you lots more, but so banking, finance, insurance, where people like Bill McKibben are giving the pressure, giving the boycotts and so on, they are beginning to respond and we've got to hold them accountable. But what is this? It's two worldviews that are clashing. And that's part of the undercurrent, the undertow of what's happening right now. And if we can gently and yet forcefully begin to create the space for something larger and flourishing, which includes this context of a story, but then it fills it in with ecological economics, green politics, alternative energies, new educational systems, new religious and ethical understandings. That is what's happening. And I think we can do this together. And to see these two worldviews, it's the end of the American dream that is materialism gone mad. That is where we are. It's the end of a dream that no longer works. We spread it all over the world and it's killing the planet because it's all about the me, not the we. So those are my very frank comments. And I know that we're probably out of time. Yeah, so Chris, you might want to have last words, or anybody having one last comment is certainly fine with me.
Yeah, I would just like to affirm your statement, appreciate what we received of Teilhard through Thomas Berry, to appreciate the many people from so many different layers of the LMU community who were present here, and beyond, my wife reminded me, and just really lift up and appreciate the positivity tempered with a very harsh reality. And I find that myself, I'm constantly working with the COVID question, the social justice question, and the climate change question. And we have our hands full, we have our hearts full, and we've really got to coordinate with our intellect moving forward, putting it together and doing what we can. So I just really, again, appreciate your presence. And I know it's late over there in Connecticut and in Florida, where some of our students are living and learning. And I'm just, again, very grateful and happy for all of the students that have been able to participate in this tonight. So carry on.
Thank you all. And thank you, dear, dear friends, Chris and Maureen, some of our very dearest, closest friends. And we look forward to when we'll be together. But thank you for this marvelous, marvelous group of wonderful questions. I couldn't possibly do justice to them because they're so excellent. And I hope you'll answer them yourself in your work. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Hope you'll take the courses and continue to learn, as we all will, of this beautiful Earth community. Much love.
Bye.
Bye-bye.